Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is your show where we put our property experts to task answering your questions. And joining me today is somebody who we certainly will put to task, John Howard, property developer, investor, author, mentor, TV panellist, and heaven knows what else.
Auctioneer tonight.
Auctioneer
for the Conservatives tonight.
Oh,
Great to be back, thank you.
Good, nice to see you, John. I'm not sure about the Conservative Party tonight. I think we'll be giving that a miss.
Well, you weren't invited actually, but.
Oh, right, okay. Well, Zee Razaq, he's CEO of Certax, property taxation experts based in St Albans. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So, nice to have you both here. John, you're going first. Your question is this. I live in the countryside and, well, this will be good for you because you live way out, don't you? So you'll be able to help with this one. I live in the countryside and my cottage is heated by an oil-fired boiler. My fuel costs have gone through the roof. Can the panel suggest the most economical conversion to a more cost-effective heating system? I've read a lot about external heat exchangers and even wet electric central heating. Any ideas, please? I think actually probably, I don't know how long we've had this question, but of course oil prices are going back a little bit now, aren't they?
You might think that, Stephen. I can assure, I'm in the same boat, live in the country, only got oil at the moment, costing me a lot of money every month, a lot more than it was last year. It has come down slightly, but it's still very expensive. Last year, we finished a scheme where we put heat source pumps in.
Yeah.
So we did 20 converted, it was like an old Borstal, funny enough, but we converted into 20.
Brought back memories, didn't it?
No, it didn't, funnily enough, but it's 20 houses. So we did vertical splits, and outside every one, we had this heat source, air source pump business, which they look like an air conditioning unit. They're quite noisy, and they're expensive to buy and they're expensive to run, and they're not very efficient in older buildings. In a brand new building, you get away with all sorts of things because the insulation is just so good. And that's one good thing about building regs at the moment. You know, we all moan about the building regulations in this country, but actually, you know, it saves lives and it saves on energy and so on. And the new regs are very, very strict, but for a good reason. So I think solar is something I'm looking into, putting some solar on. The wind, they say the problem with wind, when it's not windy, of course, nothing happens. With solar, even if it's not sunny now, you'll still get some benefit. So I'm looking at doing some solar, and I suggest this person does the same probably. And insulation, if it's an old building, I live in a grade 2 listed building, and and if it's windy, it's so the wind comes down the chimney and opens the door, the drawing room door. That's how bad it is. But I mean, some houses are much more insulated than others. I can't insulate mine any more than I do. Hopefully, this person's got a slightly more modern house and it's well insulated, because that makes a massive difference.
John, we get a lot of questions in on this subject, and I just want to try and, you're a developer with a lot of experience across the country, which I think is quite important, and across the range of properties that you deal with. So I just want to put some of these things that we get asked about to you. First of all, it's retrospective insulation. Just occurs to me and a number of people that write in, you know, you spend all this money insulating your loft and all that happens is it just blasts in even stronger through your windows and your doors that you've not done anything with. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
I think it's a major problem for listed buildings, you know, old buildings. It's very, very hard. And we're just doing a grade 2 star listed building in Southwold, which is you won't know it, Stephen, because it's in Suffolk, but it's a lovely, lovely seaside resort. And there, because the gas boilers from 2025, they don't want any gas boilers. So we're putting an electric system in where the radiators look like the old fashioned radiators, but they actually are electric. So actually that's quite a novelty in a way now. But so we're looking to do that, and we're having a hot water system where you just turn it on, the water's hot, instantly hot. So not an immersion, but you just turn it on, it instantly comes hot.
Okay.
So, you know, things are changing all the time.
Yeah. So look, I think the point I make there about the retrospective insulation is that you've got to look very carefully at the cost and actually what you're achieving. Just be careful of that, because the cost can be quite significant. And if you're not really going to get it back, you know, you do need to think twice about it, although, of course, any insulation shouldn't be discouraged. But then we go on to these heat exchangers outside.
Yes.
A lot of the things I read say that whilst they're, they are more expensive than a boiler, but they're nevertheless quite efficient. But they're only efficient if the rest of the house
Absolutely
is up to the equipment.
And that's
isn't it?
why I said about the Borstal we converted, was actually because it was an old building we converted. Although it was up to current regulations, it's still an old building. And the heat source, even a heat source pump in the ground, that's even more expensive, doesn't create enough heat to make it worthwhile. It is in a brand new home, yes, but in anything that's converted, any properties that are converted, it's very, very difficult to get. You need a supplementary heating system as well.
Yeah, I mean, that came up because I think somebody looked at the government website and where it was sort of saying, I think, in broad terms that, a heat exchange probably 35 grand to have fitted and done and put on the side.
Crazy.
But by the time you'd finished, if you'd got an old property that wasn't suitable, you'd be looking at the thick end of £100,000.
I've looked at all sorts of things, and the only thing that seems to make any sense is some solar, to be honest with you.
So just to finish up on that point, tell me then, why have the government taken the incentives off solar paneling?
I think the incentives were too good in the first place. I've got a friend of mine who specialised in solar for a few years and made an absolute fortune. I mean, the grants were crazy. And I think that's what governments do. They go from one extreme to the other, whereas if they stick to something, in the middle, sensible, but people take advantage of these grants. It's like when do you remember the first windmills that went up? You got a massive grant. All that was happening is these companies were just charging more. So they don't check anything thoroughly enough, in my view.
Just to add to what John's saying, I think solar panel definitely is an option now because of the changes in cost of heating. The other bit, insulation. We've had cladding outside the house put in. Fantastic. It was incentivized before and now it's not. It actually looks quite nice. We've also had insulation put underneath floorboards. And also if you've got any cavity walls, this stuff can actually help a lot on your bills. So we've had some of that, and some of this was incentivized for the government for any older houses.
Spoken as a true accountant, if you can save £5, you will, won't you?
Oh yeah, but this is the benefit for the individual, when everyone's getting crippled with bills.
If it costs you 10
about
quid,
electric cars,
to tell you.
about electric cars, financially, obviously they've incentivized, but if you actually look from an environmental perspective, which is supposed to be the thing, they're actually worse than petrol.
They are,
because of the batteries.
I think that's a bit harsh.
No, but this is a fact. Go and look at the batteries and the impacts that they are causing. So this is a political thing. Like at one time, diesel was preferable over petrol, right? They used to incentivize it, but that's because of lack of knowledge or political gearing rather than this is actually financially better and better for society. These are what we're seeing from researching and actually seeing impacts.
With the government, that new battery production centre that was going to be the greatest thing since ever, the government have effectively pulled out of that with any subsidies.
Australian company are buying it now.
Well, yeah, but
not an English company, which seems crazy to me.
Where's the consistency?
No, listen, they're in turmoil. It's so hard for any government to keep up with everything, in my view.
Zee, we better get on with your question. I'm a fairly small developer who I think is almost certainly going to be asked to sign up to the new government contract, rectification works on cladding. My question is, if I have to make any payments or incur any costs under this agreement, will it be totally tax deductible given the time span since the properties were built, and also that I'd be claiming against profits on a non-connected project?
Great question.
Do you like that?
And we've got to break it up into a few different things.
Okay.
So when the developer's actually developing and building the property, right, that will go part of their cost of stock. So they will get a tax benefit because the cost is increased. The issue is now they've introduced a tax, which you might have heard the Conservatives introduce for developers. Over £25 million profit, you end up paying a 4% additional tax. The whole point of this is for this cladding. It's supposed to be for 10 years. A bit of a critic, no disrespect to our friends in HMRC and everybody else, but this doesn't seem like it's going to disappear. And this tax is supposed to be the money to support the funding of this. The issue that is more really for a developer as much, is more for investors who buy the flats or the buildings they've got, because they end up having to incur the cost. And it's whether theirs is a tax deduction or not. because the developer should get it part of their stock.
But under this scheme, the leaseholders or the owners aren't going to have any liability, are they?
If that progresses, currently that's not the case, is it?
No, but on this new legislation, I think that's going to be the case. And I think what this guy's asking, Zee, is if, for instance, he built something 10 years ago, and under this new agreement, he's got to pay out 2 million quid to have it rectified, that was 10 years ago. And let's say he's built another one this year, and he's made...
Can he offset it?
Can he offset it with that time span? That's the issue.
So if they're going back 10 years, we would have to look at the legislation on that, because that is different to what I'm building now.
Well, I think if I'm building 15 years, isn't it, John? Is that the spread, 15 years?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It depends on whether it goes back to, I think we did a little exercise around capital and revenue, what the complexities are. If I'm replacing something, right, and I've been legislated to replace as well, then it's called a revenue expense and it's tax deductible. But if it's something that's increasing the value of the property, it's considered capital. And what that means is I only offset it when I sell it. So in this case, the person's actually already sold the property, I assume, as a developer.
Go back and
this
going back to repair it.
Exactly. So therefore, we would have to look at if that entity is in place, because if it's 10, 15 years, there's a lot of complexity around this. It's not a straightforward question. Provided the entity is going, I would be shocked if the government don't allow that to be a tax deductible expense, because they've already sold it. And it was so they should probably get a benefit in the year that they do it, because it's on stock that's been sold. My question was, a lot of developers actually are become investors because they buy it and they think, oh, we're going to keep hold of this, and then they lease them out. That was my question on when can they benefit on fixing those, because a lot of leaseholders are having to pay at the moment. I've got clients who have got really stung by this, and that's a big cost.
I think there's two things I was interested in. When I saw this agreement that the government have hastily drawn up, I thought this is just a recipe for an argument, isn't it? You know, especially over 15 years. And on top of which, those leaseholders that have already paid out quite significant sums, are they going to get it back?
I think the whole thing's a complete pig's ear. And I was speaking to a major house builder recently, and I said, oh, it could be costly. He said, I doubt it, John. We've got the lawyers onto it.
Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break when we'll be asking John and Zee more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. And I have two of our most informed panellists with me today, John Howard and Zee Razaq. Welcome back, guys. John, your second question.
Yes.
Another government question for you.
Great.
You're almost a representative, aren't you?
Well, it sounds like that, yeah.
Yeah. With government levelling up funds looking to be around 20 million per town or city, do the panel think this will really make much difference to local economies? I'm wondering if these areas are worth tracking to assess any increased potential in buy-to-let opportunities and subsequently increased yields from those properties. What do you think?
Well, there's two funds. That's the first thing. There's the Levelling Up Fund and there's the Town Fund. The Town Fund. The Town Fund is 25 million. And 103 or 107 towns across the UK have been granted £25 million each to tidy up their town centres. They've been allowed to choose what they use the money for, which is great. You won't be surprised to hear that about 85% of the towns are held by a Conservative MP. So I'm not here to say that it's going to hopefully boost and help the Conservative get back in at the next election, but you know, that is politics, that's how it works. So on the back of that, if you're looking to invest in any town centre, check to see whether they have got the town fund. Because if they've got the town fund, then absolutely, because 25 million goes quite a long way.
But is that double? Do you get both?
Do you get what?
Well, the town fund and the levelling.
No, they get the town. The town fund is for towns, not cities. The levelling up is a different fund altogether, which is around 20 million per. Well, I think you can apply for it, so it might be 10, 20, 30 million for the levelling up. But the town fund, I think, is more specific and better in many ways because you know who's got it. 109 towns across the UK.
But is it enough to do very much, John? I mean, I've got friends that live in houses here worth 25 million.
You know, you're London-centric. But for the rest of us, throughout the rest of the country, that's a lot of money, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. And if you, I said, look where they're investing the money, and on the back of that, it's like a wave. Get on the wave, because it will benefit the whole town. And if you're investing in that town, it will help you as well.
Yeah, I'm just a bit curious about where and how it's used. I mean, if you see a high street out in the sticks that's struggling, got a load of pop-up charity shops and unlet sort of.
And where would this be, Stephen? Not every place in the country outside London is like that. There's a lot of market towns at the moment that are doing very, very well because people don't want to travel to London or the big cities.
But how is it in Ipswich?
The 25 million fund, fun enough, it's a Conservative MP we've got, so we've got the money, is being spent on a number of things to tidy up the town centre and so on. So it will be well spent.
Well, tidying up the town centre is not going to help anybody's buy-to-let prospects, is it?
What it does do, any area where a lot of money is being invested has got to help the rest of the community. That's the whole point. And if you know where to invest, then you can benefit from the Conservative.
I just worry, John, it's a little bit like this business of, we've had HS2, we've had the Elizabeth line, and people say, oh, just look at the stations on Elizabeth line, follow them through and buy there because it'll do you good. You've got to wait 20 years to see these sorts of benefits.
Don't you think that it's a bit like shares when people say, oh, they've got, the share, the end of year accounts are out and the PLC company's done very well, the share, they've made a lot of money. A lot of that's already been priced in a few months earlier, so you don't get the benefit. And I think that's the same with Elizabeth line. I think all these things were priced in probably 5-6 years ago, not now. But I'm not very good with shares. I look at a share, Zee, and it goes down. So I never buy shares. Always stick to what you know something about, investment-wise.
I agree with you 100%. Come on, Zee, what do you think?
I think John's made some fantastic points. I've actually seen some benefits of this. My wife's from Bolton, who I don't know if that's Conservative or Labour, I don't know, but they actually invested in the town, and that actually led to property prices growing in that area, and that was one of the fastest growing, and that is linked to the town centre looking a whole lot better, because I've gone there and I thought, whoa, compared to how it was. So it can work, but I think your argument depends on where in the country, because 25 million in Bolton, no disrespect to Bolton, I am visiting there soon, is quite a big investment. Whereas if you invest it in somewhere like London or certain places, 25 million.
Stephen doesn't know where Bolton is.
He knows where Bolton is.
Of course he doesn't.
So it depends on where, I think, and then doing a bit of an evaluation.
Listen, I tell you where I am with this. I just go back to basics here. I think there's been all sorts of people over the years come up with these clever ideas. Oh, follow this, track that, you'll get better buy-to-let returns and all the rest of it. And actually, there's only a couple of ways of doing it. Use your common sense on what you're buying. Buy in popular areas. Look at the demographics of that particular area. Do your homework properly and buy on that basis.
It can't do any harm if there's £25 million being spent in the town centre, Stephen.
I think it's timing. I think timing and
doing
your research. And I think you rightly said when it's factored in. It's when you get it.
We've had this conversation in different programmes, but I think that is, headline buying.
And Stephen, you're still wrong.
Probably. Zee, what are we going to ask you? I have a portfolio of 5 buy-to-let properties held in a limited company. I'm thinking of adding 2 or 3 rental properties to the collection, but located in France. Assuming the rent from the French properties is paid into the UK limited company, does that part of the income get taxed in the UK or France or both?
Fantastic question. I think we touched on this on a previous episode, but how property works is very different to trading businesses. France is likely to tax you at source, just like the UK do for UK property. What then happens is, whatever they've taxed you, you are likely to get a tax credit in the limited company of that amount. The key dependent is what rate of tax is in that country, because that's how unilateral relief works. And this is really important to actually do your research where you're buying properties, because France, I don't know the income tax, but I'm sure it's higher than the UK.
But isn't this what's called double tax treaty or something?
So there's two parts. There's either the first position is the double taxation treaty, the second is unilateral relief, which means if there isn't a double taxation treaty, you automatically get this relief. That's how UK works. And most countries, that's what the default position is. And the default is, say, if the income tax rate in France is, say, I'm speculating here, 25%, and the UK is 20%, right? You're only going to get the relief up to the 20% against UK tax, right? So you actually end up paying the 5% additionally over there, because you would have paid the 25 and got the relief. If the rate is lower there, this is where it becomes a problem. If the rate is, say, 15%, unlikely, but if it's 15% and it's 20% in the UK, you have to pay that uplift in the UK. Right? And in this case, it's going to be subject to corporation tax rather than income tax because it's in the company. And that will depend on whether it's 19 or 25. So it's very important to do that analysis and understand that. And also, sorry, one more point is the tax calculation is different as well, because they will potentially have different write-offs in France to here. And we've had this, you have to look and you have to work it out as if you were receiving the money in the UK, and that's how it gets taxed in the UK.
And has this changed since Brexit?
Very good question. Before we were part of Europe, right?
Now, thank goodness we're not.
And different opinions on this, but we would have to look if there's actually a treaty in place. But I think it'd be the default position, but you would evaluate by country, because different countries have got some agreements, some of them have no agreements.
So has it changed since Brexit?
No, I'm saying you would have to evaluate, yes, because we're no longer a part
So
of the
it's
EU.
not the
So it will be is whether Britain's got agreement with France, which I think they should have, and whether that is different to the default position, because certain taxes have benefits when you dig into the double taxation treaty with that country. So every tax is judged differently.
See, I'm interested. Would you expect a normal, I say normal, I don't know quite what the expression would be, but let's, for argument's sake, say a normal tax auditor, advisor, accountant firm, would they have knowledge of this, or would you need a specialist advisor in this sort of situation?
Really good question, whether you need a general practitioner or a specialist. Normally how these work is, how I work with these is, I'm not an expert on every country in the world's tax aspects. So what I do
That's disappointing, isn't it?
No,
Yeah.
what I do is I get through my network a specialist in that country, and I say, what is the rules over there? How do we do it? And then we advise on the UK. That's the sensible way to do things. And you have to think like this, because UK is quite complex enough. Don't be starting to stick France and every other country, because it'd be impossible, because the rules are changing quite rapidly. If in France, for example, they are very taxed, generally quite high, and they don't really have...
So are we, by the way.
It's increasing, and I think that needs to be looked at in itself.
Who's brought most of that in, John?
No, without question, it's crazy. I couldn't agree more.
Sorry, no, I said who brought it in.
Sorry?
I said who brought it in.
Well, unfortunately, the current government brought it in. But they are trying to get it down next year, because there'll be elections, so things will
I was going to say,
down.
no particular incentive there to bring it down.
I watched an interesting piece, actually, on the tax situation across all the taxes. I think when you add up the impacts that we spoke about, someone does have to pay the bills. And we have to somehow have a grown-up conversation where people are very clear on what things are costing us. Because you can't keep on spending money and not have no revenue, i.e. tax, to pay it. If we're going to cut down spending, then we should cut down tax. And that's historically the UK position. Whether we're going to return to that from the current levels, only time will tell. But if we want to get in place and stay as one of the best countries in the world to live in and try to provide the services, we have to think about what we're going to sacrifice, in my opinion.
Okay. John, your main occupation, I suppose, is developer more than anything else.
Yeah.
And Zee, you're an accountant and tax advisor who deals with a lot of developers. Just in the last 20 seconds or 10 seconds each, prospects for the year? I
think, well, this year's a very exciting year for us especially, because there's a lot of part-finished distressed stock out there which we're buying. I've set up a recovery fund to either help people or buy them off banks and so on, and to complete the development. So for us, it's a busy year. Exciting. Going forward, yeah.
A lot of potential opportunities, and it's understanding the marketplace, speaking to people like John who are in the thick of all the fun, and making sure that you're taking benefits and evaluating your opportunities and get your financing right.
Seems to me you're both saying it's a year of opportunity.
Always is in recessions, in my opinion.
I agree, always.
Okay, well, there we are. Big thank you to John Howard and Zee Razaq. Thank you
Pleasure.
both very
Thank
much
you.
for your input to the programme. I'm Stephen Galpin. Thank you for watching, and join me again next time on Property Question Time.